Despite being something of a purposefully low-key and understated character, the Primera Espada Coyote Starrk is absolutely one of the most popular characters in Bleach with fans. And I'm not just talking about as far as villains go either. I think in terms of the entire cast of the series, Starrk is absolutely up there. And I would argue as well that outside of perhaps Ulquiorra and Gin, Starrk is probably the #1 deceased character that fans would have loved to have seen make some kind of a return. To many people, I think Stark's death kind of felt a little bit unjust. Starrk was never seen as truly or wholly evil like a number of other Espada were. Starrk was mostly a villain by way of circumstance. Now, the legitimacy of Stark's villainy is something that I think you could make an entire video on, but just do a Cliff Notes version. I think there is an argument to be made for both saying that Starrk is and wasn't a villain, and evil is a very strong word. You have to remember that Starrk was seemingly okay with allowing Aizen to annihilate an entire city's worth of humans, but at the same time he just didn't really seem like he wanted to be there. It really wasn't in him to even be a part of that war, and I think Stark's lethargy can't be understated. And the reason this is important is because many fans felt that it was unjust for Starrk to be brutally killed off in that war as though he were just another villain. But of course he does come up against Kyoraku Shunsui, who isn't really too well known for his mercy when it comes to actual battles. If necessary, Kyoraku is absolutely not afraid to get the job done and follow through with it. So because of Stark's seeming reluctance right to the very end to even be a part of the conflict that was kind of created in spite of him, I think many people felt that it would be cool to see him return with some kind of a second chance. And you know what, I'm included in that. I actually do quite like Stark's canon death, or I do think it's maybe a little anticlimactic for the first Espada, but for the most part I do kind of enjoy it, but I can't deny I would have loved to have seen him make a return. And so in this episode of Bleach What If, we're going to be looking at what Starrk would have done and how things would have played out differently for him had he actually survived the Fake Karakura Town battle. Before we get started, guys, if you haven't hit subscribe yet, make sure to do that now, as you're in the perfect place for more Bleach content just like this. Also, don't forget, if you really enjoyed the video, give it a thumbs up, as it does help me out, it helps the channel out, and it means that the videos get more exposure on the old YouTube algorithm. And you can also take that support for me another step further, as we have a Patreon for the channel as well, where you can get videos like this one early, and you can support me over there for as little as $1 a month. An enormous shout out to all of the patrons supporting this channel, whose names are up on the screen right now. I couldn't do this without you, so thank you so much. So as I do normally with these what if videos, though I know there hasn't been an awful lot of them so far, I like to try and keep them as quote unquote realistic, or at least as close to the story as possible. Really look at them through the lens of how could this actually happen and what would be the ramifications of that on the plot. So to begin with, I think we need to look at the manner of how Starrk actually dies in the story. So Starrk is killed by Kyoraku Shunsui at the very end of their battle after having been stabbed in the back by Kyoraku's Kage Oni ability and really just being completely thrown off from that point onwards. Unlike a lot of his Arrancar brethren, Starrk is a highly emotional individual, and these emotions tend to either affect him or at the very least get the better of him during his fight, which is something we see a number of times. And after he gets stabbed in the back, I get the impression that the realism of his situation suddenly sets in. Like, up until now, Starrk has barely been injured. He's that good and that skilled that he's basically managed to stay ahead of the curve, you know, for the entire fight so far. But now, someone's playing dirty, someone's willing to kind of play underhanded to get the job done, and Starrk kind of realizes, maybe, you know, I don't have it in me to care about this. You know, I'm dying. There's a big hole in my chest. I got blood coming out of me. I'm now having to summon a sword, and I don't want to be here. You know, all Starrk really wanted at the end of the day was comrades, was friends, was people who could be on the same level as him, that he could exist with. Because he's never going to be as weak as he would like to be. But unfortunately, being this strong, having those comrades, having those allies also means responsibility, putting Starrk in a position he doesn't want to be in. So as soon as he's stabbed in the back, we see his resolve, his motivation just completely drain away, like the blood, as though it's coming out of the wound in his chest along with his blood. And it's really kind of fascinating to watch that. It's just a downward spiral for Stark after that until he is eventually finished off by Kyoraku's Iro Oni ability, where basically he just completely rends Stark in half. And a lot of people I remember back in the day were like, how has Stark died from this? It's just like a slash. But really, if you don't even have to look that hard to see that Stark is like split in two. His body is fracturing, he's breaking apart, and he's completely rent asunder. And then he falls to the floor and he's never seen again. And so with Stark's broken body being how it is, it's not hard to see why he wasn't able to survive. But at the same time, he's an incredibly strong individual, so it's possible he could have held on long enough for Orihime to come and save him at the same time as she saved Harabel. What's really important to talk about, however, regarding the future of Stark's story, should he survive, is does Lilinet die with him or not? Or does Lilinet die when Stark survives? Because I think that would create a very different future for Stark. Now, in the canon manga, both of them seemingly die at exactly the same time, essentially. I've always personally thought that Lilinet's death was signified by Stark's eye patch shattering, because the eye patch resembled her original helmet that she had. And then in the kind of inner monologue Stark has, he says that they will go together forever, and that forever is mentioned on Stark's final panel. So I've always assumed that is meant to mean they even go into death together, as they also, came into life together. However, if maybe Stark somehow survives that fall, is somehow put together by Orihime, and Lilinet has already died by that point, what does that mean for Stark? Can he ever activate Resurrection again? Or would Lilinet just live along with him, because if he survives, then maybe she does as well? The anime plays with this a little bit, and the anime actually gives us quite a different fight to the manga. Some may even argue a superior battle. It certainly tugs emotionally quite hard, because basically what happens in the anime is they decide to personify Lilinet as the wolves, Stark's soul wolves that he creates. And I think that's kind of neat, because Lilinet in the manga doesn't say anything once the fight with Kyoraku goes on to its finale. The last thing she says is her kind of rousing speech to Stark when he's kind of downed momentarily by love. And then in the anime, Kyoraku destroys the wolves using Busho Goma, and you're supposed to think that Lilinet is actually dead at this point. Like, she's dead, and Stark is, like, noticeably worried. He's calling out to her, and she's gone. And it's really, really brutal, and in some ways, it's harsher than it is in the manga, because Stark is alone again in his final moments. Lilinet is gone, and he's calling around for her, and so you can already see here that if he was somehow resurrected or kept alive without Lilinet around, he would probably be a very different person in the future. But for the sake of this what if video, I'm going to say that Lilinet survives with Stark, although I could totally see a Lone Ranger version of Stark living out his days, but then him not being able to use his resurrection would be a bit of a shame. So at least for the sake of this video for now, we're going to say Lilinet survives with him. And before we move on to how Stark would deal with the Thousand Year Blood War, I just want to talk briefly as well about Stark's relationship with Aizen and what that might mean for the future as well. So Stark's always kind of seemed to have quite a lot of respect for Aizen. He certainly thanks him greatly for introducing him to like-minded and equally powerful, or nearly as powerful comrades, effectively removing Stark's loneliness and giving him that thing he needed. To the point where, as Stark is dying, he actively apologizes to Aizen, and this is after seeing how much Baragon hated him. So I've always found that to be kind of interesting. Stark, however, he doesn't think that Aizen is flawless. He's disappointed when Aizen doesn't comment on Baragon's death at all, and even later on, he even says to Lilinet that he thinks Aizen's probably not going to help them out whatsoever, and Stark kind of knows that he's on his own here, or at the very least, Aizen has sort of sent them off to die, but he's in it too deep to really do anything about it. That being said, we know how greatly Stark values his friends. We know he was disappointed by Aizen not saying anything for Baragon, although even then he said he wouldn't take revenge for Baragon regardless. However, if a near-death Stark was lying on the ground at the bottom of the Fake Karakura Town and witnessed Aizen effectively betraying and trying to kill Harabel, I think that would sour Stark on Aizen pretty much forever moving forwards. And I think Stark would be way more likely to side with, you know, his actual friends and comrades over somebody who has betrayed them. So I think moving on in the future, if Stark witnessed that, he wouldn't really have any lasting respect or loyalty to Aizen once the war is over. And so that brings us to the 1,000-Year Blood War then. Stark survived Kyoraku's slash and was presumably saved by Orihime at the same time as Harabel and kind of cleaned up with a lot of the other Arrancar, and has made his way back to Hueco Mundo. One of the really sad things about Stark dying in the manga is that I think he would be extremely happy with how Hueco Mundo turns out after the Aizen War. You know, Hueco Mundo is now kind of a, you know, it's not a utopia, but it's a much better place, ruled slightly more with order rather than chaos. Harabel and Neliel have taken over the reins of leadership, and it's just a much better place that's pushing closer to civilization, to civilized life. And I think Stark would have really enjoyed that, because, you know, he hates fighting, he hates conflict, he just wants to live a chill life. And I think that the new version of Hueco Mundo would absolutely have given him that. And despite being probably the most powerful Arrancar there at the time, I don't think there's any chance that Stark would have vied for the top spot or the throne. He would have been more than happy to leave it in the responsible hands of Harabel, but perhaps lending some advice on the side every now and then. But he's more than happy to mostly keep to himself, but I do think that unlike Ulquiorra, who in my previous video about him surviving, we mentioned that he would probably disappear for a while to be on his own, I think Stark would embrace the new life, probably living in Las Noches and just enjoying peace. That being said, I do imagine that Grimjoe would at least try and challenge Stark for some kind of supremacy, even if Stark wasn't the one on the throne. Personally, though, I don't think that would go overly well for Grimjoe, but I imagine if I was to see this scenario in the manga, it would be broken up pretty quickly before it actually escalated by someone like Nell or like Harabel. One cool visual I've got in my head that I think would be really awesome to see would be Stark kind of patrolling Las Noches, or, you know, the outer perimeter of Las Noches with his wolf army. I think that would be really awesome, seeing them darting around the sands, and I think that would be a really cool role for him to have. Pretty simple, he can mostly just sit back within the fortress itself while his wolves kind of act as like security as they maintain the outer wall. I think that would be pretty awesome. So if we flash back briefly to Stark's battle with Love and Rose, when he is kind of knocked down by Love, he has this kind of almost like moment of realization where he just doesn't want to be there anymore. And he says, you know, like, Aizen has no intention of helping us, and if we keep fighting, more people are just going to die, and I don't want that, so I just want to kind of take a nap, go back home, and forget all about this. But Lilinet kind of rightly tells him, you know, that's not the right attitude. Aizen gave you the number of 1 because he believes in you and he believes in your strength. And as the Primera, you need to act like it and you need to get back in the battle. And only by fighting can you prevent more of our friends from dying. And Stark eventually sees that she's right. And I think as Hueco Mundo is invaded and attacked by the Vandenreich, this is a wonderful chance for Stark to really make good on that and actually act like the Primera that he once was and really step up to the plate to defend his new friends and his new home and his new way of life. And although Stark hates fighting, he doesn't like getting involved in fighting, this is actually an aggressive force invading his home, his new way of life, and I think that he would actually step up to try and bring them down. And I think that would be really nice. I think it'd be really cool to see him taking on the Quincy, you know, obviously kind of annihilating most of the foot soldiers with his wolves, all the while flashing back to that speech Lilinet gave him. Perhaps if Lilinet didn't survive and he could somehow still activate his resurrection, though I don't think that's possible, that would be a really powerful moment, him remembering her words as he's defending Hueco Mundo and his family. But like I said, I think she's probably alive. So you can kind of imagine it, as Hueco Mundo is awash with blue flame as the Quincy move in, Stark thinks back to the fact that he must act like the Primera and that these people believe in him, and I think you would get a pretty amazing showing from him, and it would just be really cool to see them all battening down and trying to defend Hueco Mundo. At the same time, however, the Vandenreich are a big bunch of cheaters, and I think that there is a great chance they will come prepared to deal with Stark, as they would know he was still alive at this point. So if we kind of go off what happens in the manga, that Yhwach, being the king, goes after the queen and, you know, smashes into Las Noches and annihilates Harabel with ease himself, I could quite easily see somebody like Hashwolf being deployed to deal with Stark. Bear in mind, this is before the invasion of the Soul Society, so Hashwolf is available. And I think that would be really cool. I think because Stark, maybe, you know, he'd have killed a few soldiers by this point, and then Hashwolf is there remarking at how amazing Stark's strength is, but Stark could very quickly try and end the fight, only for Hashwolf to activate the balance and bring Stark down. Obviously, I don't think Stark would die here, but A, it's a real good show of power for the Vandenreich to have Hashwolf defeat him, but B as well, it's just a sign that Stark, even though he wasn't quite able to defeat these guys, and it's a real kind of testament to the strength of the Quincy. That being said, like I said, Stark isn't killed here, and to be honest, he's probably even barely injured. Now, I think after the initial fall of Hueco Mundo, and after Kirge Opie has been killed, so most of the hunting army have been driven out, I think Stark would be greatly saddened by what had happened to his new home. You can really see it again. You can totally envision the panels. Hueco Mundo is on fire, there's blue flame everywhere, corpses litter the sand, and Stark is just kind of sat on the sand with a mound of hollows around him, mirroring his flashback about his history when Eisen first found him, except the difference here is that these hollows were not killed by Stark, but by an invading enemy force, and he was once again unable to protect his friends. This time not from himself, but from someone else. And as we mentioned earlier, Stark's very prone to his emotions. He's very able to be grabbed by them quite easily, and they will sway him with little effort, it seems. So I think he would be very downbeat about the whole situation and kind of not necessarily close himself off, but be alone while he's, you know, observing the damage. And at this point, I think he probably would be found by somebody like Nell or Kisuke, or I'm even leaning towards Orihime. It'd be really nice for someone like Orihime to have this kind of moment where it's a human approaching one of the strongest Arrancar around, and bringing him back around to the light again, explaining that she's the one who saved him originally, she's the one who saved Harabel, and now they need to kind of come together once again to try and undo the damage that has been done. It'd be really nice to give Orihime a powerful moment like that, but I could easily see it being the other characters as well. I mean, imagine if it was Grimjo. Imagine Grimjo showing a great amount of maturity, finding Stark out there alone in the desert with all these bodies around him, and Grimjo kind of giving it in his normal way, being quite uncouth, but at the same time saying, like, we need to pick ourselves back up again and take the fight to this Yhwach guy if we're going to stop this from happening again. Because that is Grimjo's mentality, essentially. He says to Ichigo that if Hueco Mundo is destroyed by Yhwach, I don't have somewhere to kill you. That's Grimjo's own way of basically saying, I need to protect my home. And I think that'd be really nice to get a moment between him and Stark like that as well. There's a lot of potential here for great interactions. But regardless, Stark joins up once again with the rest of the Hueco Mundo task force, and like the others, eventually makes it into Varvelt, kind of appearing at the same time as Grimjo and Neliel in that moment where they are inside Yukio and Riruka's device to get them up into the palace. However, upon arriving in Varvelt, while Stark might spend a little bit of time with them, I think he would sense a familiar Reiatsu and decide to go and find that person, and of course, that is Kyoraku Shunsui. And I think it would be so cool, you know, seeing Stark intervene in the battle against Sternritter X, the X-Axis Leal Barrow, turning it into a bit of a gunfight momentarily as Leal's trying to snipe this insanely quick Espada, who's also blasting him with Cero pistols. I mean, you know you want to see that. That sounds awesome to me. But more than anything, it would just be so great to see Stark and Kyoraku reconnecting like this. Like, I don't think it makes sense for them to meet up prior to this, but this works quite naturally for Stark's own path throughout the Thousand-Year Blood War. Something cool about this as well is it would actually make good on Stark finally getting to see Kyoraku's Bankai after all this time, although ironically this time he wouldn't be the one it was targeting. That being said, I mean, how would that situation work? Would Stark be caught up in the Bankai? Presumably he would be. Maybe there'd be some agreement made between the two of them where Kyoraku's like, look, I need to use my Bankai in this fight, you are going to be caught up in it. But Stark is very, very quick, very perceptive, very intelligent. Maybe he can make his way through the Bankai on his own steam. Regardless, however, I do kind of think it makes a lot of sense for Stark to die at some point. I know we've resurrected him in this video, and resurrecting him to kill him again does seem a little bit harsh. However, him making some kind of valiant sacrifice, protecting Kyoraku from some kind of sneak attack by Lil Barrow, for instance, would be really cool, and almost like a nice throwback to Stark getting sneak attacked by Kyoraku. And this time, he's kind of dying, protecting and fighting for not only his new hollow friends, his new home they've built, but also brand new friends and allies in the Shinigami. Not only does he have a new life for himself, but he is less alone than ever. He's even fighting alongside the guy who he was originally battling back in the Fake Karakura Town arc. So I'm not saying that Stark has to die, but I do think it would be a satisfying end for his character to maybe protect Kyoraku or something like that. And maybe he even dies, you know, saying to Kyoraku, you know, I told you I thought we were alike. Perhaps after he's seen how Kyoraku has stayed behind to protect his friends and comrades from Lil Barrow, Stark is effectively doing the same thing. And it's once again this idea of similarities and mirror images coming into play here, with Kyoraku being the captain of Squad 1 and Stark being Espada 1, and with Harabel not around at this point, presumably she's still under guard. Stark is like the de facto leader of the Hollow Regiment, so he's kind of in the same position as Kyoraku as well, both of them going up against the leader of the Schutzstaffel. I think it would work really, really well, and seeing how Kyoraku stayed behind to protect people has made Stark kind of want to do the same thing, and he's found something worth dying for, which is his new friends and family, which now even extends to the man who once tried to kill him. And I think that would be a really kind of satisfying way to take Stark out of the story once again after his renewed return to the series. But like I said at the start of this video though, it's difficult for me because I do enjoy Stark's death, his normal death that we get in the series. Like I said, it's a little anticlimactic, and I do think that in some ways the anime kind of improves on it. It makes it a lot harder to watch. It's difficult to watch for Stark because then it really feels more than ever like he's not supposed to be there. At the same time, I'm not sure that's the vibe Kubo necessarily wanted for that fight, because Kubo explicitly has Stark saying that he and Lilinet are going always together forever, even when they die. It seems like that's supposed to be echoed there as well. So I think in this new version of events for Stark, I would echo that same sentiment. If he were to die here too, he and Lilinet would pass on at the same time together. And that's pretty much it for this video on what if Stark survived. This is kind of the route I think the character would go down. It's essentially glorified fan fiction, but it's a lot of fun to speculate on nonetheless. And it's really cool to see how his story might differ from somebody like Ulquiorra. I think Stark's path is quite clear-cut, actually, and I would really love to have seen it end up with him aiding Kyoraku against another gun user in Varvelt. But that's just my thoughts on what would happen if Stark survived his battle in the Fake Karakura Town. Let me know in the comments below what you think would happen with this character. Would he even join up with the other Hollows in Las Noches, or would he stick entirely to himself? Also, let me know as well in the comments if you think, can Stark even activate Resurrection if Lilinet's not around? I've kind of assumed no, which is why for me, and for this whole video to work at all, Lilinet has to survive as well. But let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Until next time though guys, I'll catch you later, and I'll see you then.